The Duke of Everscroft had come to the Herringworth ball intending to say nothing to anyone, and he would remember for the rest of his life the precise moment that resolution broke. It broke on the words, spoken loud enough to carry across the length of the ballroom. "I release you, Miss Weatherby. I cannot in conscience bind myself to a woman of no fortune when my own prospects have so improved. Surely you would not wish me ruined for sentiment." Sebastian Thorne set down his glass without drinking from it. He had been standing in the shadow of a marble pilaster near the orchestra, half a head taller than the men around him, ignored in the way that only the very powerful can be ignored when they wish it, and he had been watching the crowd with the flat, tired attention of a man who had attended 400 such evenings and expected nothing of the 400th. He had expected nothing of this one. And then a young man in a peacock blue coat had raised his voice in the center of the floor, and the music had faltered, and every jeweled head in the room had turned toward a slender woman in a gown of unfashionable gray silk who stood entirely alone. He knew the young man by sight. Crispin Marlowe, a barrister's son with a rising practice and a rising opinion of himself, lately much in the company of the Pembroke heiress. He did not know the woman. She was perhaps 24, dark-haired, with a face that in that first instant was so carefully composed that Sebastian mistook her stillness for indifference. Then he saw her hand. It was pressed flat against her skirt, and it was trembling, and she was pressing it hard against the silk to make it stop. "You are unkind, sir," she said. Her voice was low and even, and it did not break, though he saw the cost of keeping it even in the tendon that stood out along her throat. "You might have written to me. You might have said this in a letter in a quiet room, and I should have released you gladly and wished you joy. You have chosen instead to say it here before 300 people that they might see you do it. I do not understand why." "Come, Miss Weatherby, there is no call for a scene." "I have made no scene, Mr. Marlowe. You have made the scene. I have only stood in it." A ripple went through the watching crowd, and it was not a kind ripple. Sebastian had lived among these people all his life, and he understood the sound of it precisely. It was the sound of amusement finding a target. Somewhere a woman laughed behind her fan. Miss Pembroke, the heiress, stood a little behind Crispin Marlowe with a small, satisfied smile arranged upon her mouth, and the smile told Sebastian everything he needed to know about who had wished this done in public and why. To humiliate the discarded woman was to make the new arrangement final. One did not crawl back to a man who had shamed you before all society. The cruelty was not carelessness. It was strategy. He watched the woman in gray lift her chin. She looked around the room once, slowly, and Sebastian saw her searching the faces for a single friendly one and finding none, and he saw the exact moment she understood that she was alone, and that she would have to walk the whole length of that shining floor alone with every eye upon her. She gathered her skirt. She turned toward the doors, which were very far away. Sebastian Thorne was not a man who acted on impulse. He had buried impulse a long time ago, in a churchyard beside a woman he had not been permitted to love, and in the 10 years since he had built his life on deliberation, on distance, on the cold and useful reputation that made men lower their voices when he entered a room. He was called the Frost Duke by those who did not know him and worse by those who thought they did. He had not danced in 6 years. He intended to leave this ball as he had entered it, unremarked. He crossed the floor. He was not aware of deciding to do it. He was aware only that his feet were moving, that the crowd was parting before him the way it always parted, that faces were turning toward him now with a different expression entirely, the murmur changing key. He walked directly into the empty space at the center of the room where the woman in gray stood, and he stopped before her, and he bowed. It was a full bow, unhurried, the bow one gave to a duchess, and he held it a heartbeat longer than courtesy required so that the entire room should have time to see it and understand it. "Miss Weatherby," he said, "I believe the next is a waltz. Will you honor me?" He watched something happen in her face that he would think about for a great many nights afterward. First, blank incomprehension, as though he had spoken in a language she did not know. Then a flash of something that was almost anger, quickly mastered, the look of a proud creature that suspects it is being offered pity and would sooner die than take it. And then last, a swift and searching intelligence, her gray eyes moving over his face, weighing him, deciding whether the hand he had extended was a rescue or a further mockery arranged to complete her ruin. "Your grace is very good," she said quietly, "but I think you do not know who I am." "I know that a gentleman has behaved abominably," Sebastian said, "and that no one in this room has troubled to disagree with him. I find I should like to disagree with him. Will you dance, Miss Weatherby, or will you leave me standing here with my hand out, which I confess would embarrass me a great deal?" The smallest thing happened at the corner of her mouth. It was not a smile. It was the ghost of the muscle that would one day make a smile, and it was enough. She placed her gloved hand in his. The orchestra, which had been paralyzed, recovered itself and began the waltz. Sebastian led her out. He was aware of the whole room watching, of Crispin Marlowe's face gone slack with astonishment, of Miss Pembroke's satisfied smile curdling into something else. He was aware chiefly of the woman in his arms, who danced correctly and stiffly, and held herself as far from him as the form allowed, and who kept her eyes fixed upon his cravat as though it contained instructions. "You need not hold yourself so rigid," he said. "They will think I have trodden on you. I am wondering, your grace, what you want." "To finish the dance. Men of your rank do not cross a ballroom for a woman they have never met to finish a dance. So I am wondering. And I would rather you told me plainly, because I have had a very great deal of pretty speaking this evening, and it has none of it been true." He looked down at her, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Sebastian Thorne was surprised. Not charmed, not yet. Surprised, which was rarer and he would come to understand more dangerous. Most women he had known, offered the arm of a duke before 300 witnesses, would have wept prettily and been grateful. This one was interrogating him. "Very well," he said, plainly. "I watched a man break faith with you in the cruelest manner I have seen in some years, and I watched a room full of people who ought to know better find it entertaining, and I found that I did not wish to be one more silent person in it. That is all. It is not charity if that is what you fear, and it is not a whim to be talked about tomorrow. It is only that I could not stand still." She was quiet for a moment. They turned. Through the great windows the summer dark was coming down over the Haringworth gardens, and the chandeliers threw their light down on the two of them turning alone in the middle of the floor while the crowd pressed back against the walls. "Then I thank you," she said at last, and now she did look up at him, and he saw that her eyes were bright with tears she had refused to shed for Crispin Marlowe and would not shed now either. "But you should know that you have made me a great deal of trouble, your grace. Tomorrow they will not say a duke was kind to a jilted spinster. They will say the Frost Duke has taken a fancy, and they will watch, and when you tire of it, as such men do, I shall be twice ruined instead of once. You have been generous with a thing that costs you nothing and costs me everything. I do not think you meant it so, but it is so." It was, he would reflect later, the most honest thing anyone had said to him in a decade, and she had said it while dancing in a low, pleasant voice with tears standing in her eyes and her chin held level. He did not have an answer for it. The waltz was ending. He led her from the floor and bowed over her hand, and she curtsied, and she walked out of the Haringworth ballroom with her head high and her step unhurried, and this time no one laughed, because a duke had danced with her and no one quite dared. Sebastian did not see where she went. He stood a moment where she had left him. Then Lady Haringworth was at his elbow, all fluttering delight, and behind her came others, the whole room reconstituting itself around him, and he answered them in monosyllables and left within the quarter hour. In the carriage he found he was still holding the memory of that trembling hand pressed flat against gray silk, and the level voice saying, "You have been generous with a thing that costs you nothing," and he found that it would not let him go. Her name was Rosalind Weatherby. He learned the rest of it within 2 days, because Sebastian Thorne, when he wished to know a thing, knew it quickly. She was the elder daughter of Sir Edmund Weatherby, a baronet of ancient name and exhausted fortune whose estate at Cheldon had been mortgaged twice over, and whose health had failed after the second mortgage in a manner his physicians called an affliction of the nerves and his neighbors called ruin. Lady Weatherby was some years dead. There was a younger sister, Henrietta, 17 and lively. There was a Greytant, a Mrs. Pettigrew, with a small independence and a sharp tongue, in whose house on Mount Street the two Weatherby girls had been staying for the season, chaperoned on the last of Sir Edmund's credit, in the hope that Rosalind's engagement to the promising Mr. Marlowe might be brought to a wedding before the money ran out entirely. The engagement had been the family's single anchor. Crispin Marlowe had courted her the year before, when his practice was smaller and her father's ruin less advanced, and had grown cooler as her circumstances darkened and warmer, apparently, in exact proportion as the Pembroke fortune came within his reach. Everscroft's man of business laid this out for him in a dry recitation across the library desk, and Sebastian listened to it with his fingers steepled and his face still, and thought that he had rarely heard a plainer account of a woman betrayed by every arrangement that should have protected her. She had been sold, in effect, and then found unsaleable, and then discarded where it would do the seller the most credit. And she had stood in the middle of it and said, "I have made no scene, sir. You have made the scene." "There is one thing more, your grace," said the man of business, "which your grace may find of interest or may not. Miss Weatherby is a person of some accomplishment, not in the ordinary way. It appears she has for some years managed the practical affairs of the Cheldon estate on her father's behalf, the drainage and the tenancies and the accounts, and managed them, by the report of the steward, uncommonly well. And she draws botanical subjects chiefly. I am told a folio of her plates was shown last winter to the curators of the Physic Garden at Chelsea, who thought highly enough of them to speak of an engraving. Nothing came of it. Her father was ashamed to have it known his daughter worked." "Ashamed," Sebastian repeated. "A baronet's daughter, your grace, drawing plants for money. It is not the thing." Sebastian rose and went to the window. Below him, the garden of Everscroft House lay in its formal squares, box and gravel and the roses his mother had planted, and beyond the wall the roofs of a city in which, at that hour, some hundreds of people were retelling the story of how the Frost Duke had danced with Sir Edmund Weatherby's jilted daughter and what it might mean. It would mean, he thought, exactly what Rosalind Weatherby had said it would mean. He had acted without calculation for once in 10 years, and the world would put a calculation to it regardless, and she would pay the reckoning. Unless he made the calculation true. The thought arrived fully formed, and he examined it with the detachment he brought to everything. He was 36. He had been unmarried by choice through a decade in which every matchmaking mother in 3 counties had thrown her daughters at his feet, because he had learned young what it cost to love where the world forbade it, and had resolved to spend the rest of his life untouched. His heir, failing a son, was a cousin he disliked but could tolerate. He had no need of a wife and less desire for one. What he had, standing at the window, was the memory of a hand trembling against gray silk, and a phrase that would not leave him, and the entirely novel sensation of caring what became of a stranger. He did not that day decide to marry Rosalind Weatherby. He was too honest with himself to pretend the thing was so simple, and too aware that she had already told him, dancing, that a duke's passing kindness would ruin her worse than Marlowe's cruelty had. If he called on her once and let it be seen and then withdrew, he would do her real and lasting harm. He understood that he had, by crossing that floor, taken on an obligation, and that the only honorable discharge of it was not a grand gesture but a long and patient one. He would have to give her something she could stand on when he was gone from it. He would have to make her not the woman the Duke pitied, but the woman the Duke could not do without, and he would have to make it true, because Rosalind Weatherby would see through anything that was not. "Have the carriage brought round tomorrow at 11, he said. "I mean to call on Mrs. Pettigrew in Mount Street, and find out for me the name of the curator at the Chelsea Physic Garden who saw Miss Weatherby's plates. I should like to write to him." The man of business, who had served the family 30 years and had seen the Duke do many cold and deliberate things and no warm and deliberate ones, permitted himself the very smallest lift of an eyebrow, and wrote it down. That evening Sebastian dined alone, as he did most evenings, at one end of the long table in the great dining room where his father had presided, and his grandfather before him, under the portraits of thorns who had all, without exception, married for land and lived without love, and left the world exactly as cold as they had found it. He looked up the table at the empty chairs and thought that he had meant to be the last of them, the cold end of a cold line, and that a woman in gray silk who had never asked him for anything had somehow, in the space of a single waltz, made that intention seem not noble but merely lonely. He raised his glass a very little, to no one, and drank. In Mount Street, at that same hour, Rosalind Weatherby sat at the window of a narrow bedroom with her sister asleep beyond the door and her Greytant's house settling around her into silence, and she looked at the letter she had begun 3 times to write to her father and could not finish, and she thought about the Duke of Everscroft's face when he had said I could not stand still. She had meant every word she said to him. He had done her a kindness that would cost her dearly, and she did not thank fortune for it. She had learned to distrust the kindness of powerful men. Her whole ruin had been built of the kindnesses of powerful men, her father's creditors who had been so understanding, Crispin who had been so ardent. She had survived the evening because she had refused to weep, and she meant to survive tomorrow the same way, and the day after. She had exactly one plan, which was to be of use to her sister and her father until she could not be, and to expect nothing, and to be surprised by nothing, and above all never again to let herself believe that any man's regard was a thing she could lean her weight upon. She did not know, folding away the unfinished letter, that at 11 the following morning a duke's carriage would stop at her Greytant's door. She would have laughed at the notion. She had told the man plainly that he had done a foolish, generous thing and would tire of it, and she believed, sitting at her window in the summer dark, that she had seen the last of the Duke of Everscroft, and that all she had left of the whole strange evening was a thing to be got over, like a bruise. She was wrong about a very great deal, and right about the one thing that mattered most, which was that a duke's regard was the most dangerous gift in the world. But she was wrong about who was in danger. The Duke of Everscroft's carriage stopped at the door in Mount Street at 11 o'clock precisely, and Sebastian observed, as he stepped down, that a curtain across the street had already twitched. By noon it would be known in a dozen drawing rooms that he had called. He had considered this and decided he did not care, or rather that he cared and had chosen to spend the coin anyway, because a private call that no one saw would do Rosalind Weatherby no good at all. If he meant to mend her standing, he must be seen to value her openly, and if he was not prepared to be seen, he had no business having crossed the ballroom in the first place. Mrs. Pettigrew received him in a small, over-furnished parlor with the air of a woman who had decided to be neither impressed nor deceived. She was 70, upright as a poker, with black eyes that went over him like a customs officer over a suspicious trunk. "Your Grace does us great honor," she said, in a tone that meant he had better have a reason for it. "I hope I do not do you inconvenience, ma'am. I came to ask after Miss Weatherby, and to ask her, if she is willing, whether she would do me the kindness of a quarter-hour's conversation on a matter of business." "Business?" The black eyes did not blink. "My great-niece has no business, your Grace, that a duke need trouble himself over. On the contrary, ma'am, I believe she has a folio of botanical drawings that the curators at Chelsea thought worthy of engraving, and I have a wall of a house in the country that has wanted good botanical plates these 20 years, and I have written to Mr. Aldous at the Physic Garden, who remembers her work with enthusiasm. I should like to commission her. That is my business. I mention it before I have seen her because I do not wish you to imagine I have come to make love to a young lady who was ill-used in public 2 nights ago, which would be contemptible, and which I have not come to do." There was a silence. Something shifted very slightly behind the old woman's eyes, not warmth, but the beginning of attention. "You are blunt for a duke," she said. "I am told it is my chief defect." "It is a rare defect. Most of your order lies so smoothly one wants to applaud." She considered him another moment, and then she rang the little bell at her elbow, and when the maid came she said, "Ask Miss Weatherby to come down, and send Miss Henrietta to sit in the corner and mind her needlework, and if Miss Henrietta says one word I shall know of it." When the maid had gone she turned back to Sebastian. "I will tell you plainly, your grace, since you deal in plainness. Rosalind has been made a spectacle of once this week. If you are toying with her, if this is a great man's amusement, you will do her a harm from which she will not recover, and I am too old to forgive it. She has borne more than you know, and borne it without complaint. If you cannot be in earnest, be gone before she comes through that door." "I am in earnest, ma'am," Sebastian said, "about the plates. As for the rest, I do not yet know what I am, and I will not tell you a pretty thing I have not proved. I will tell you only that I do not toy. I have not the temperament for it." Rosalind came in then, and he rose. She was in the gray silk still, or another very like it, and she had heard, he thought, the last of the exchange, because she looked at her gray tant with a swift question and at him with the wary level look he remembered. She curtsied. He bowed. Henrietta, a bright dark-eyed girl who was manifestly bursting, went to the corner and took up an embroidery hoop and stared at him over it. "Your Grace," Rosalind said. "Miss Weatherby, I will not waste your morning. Mr. Aldous of the Chelsea Physic Garden speaks very highly of a folio of plates you showed him last winter. I have long wished to have the flowers of my Everscroft garden set down by a real hand, the roses in particular, my mother's roses, of which there are near 40 varieties and no record. I should like to commission a folio of 40 plates, drawn from the living plant, over the course of the summer and autumn. The fee I would propose is 200 guineas, half upon commencement. I have brought the terms in writing." He set a folded paper on the table between them. "You are of course free to refuse, and free to name a different price, and free to think me a fool for offering it. But it is honest work, honestly wanted, and I hope you will not refuse it out of a suspicion of me, which I would understand but which would be a pity." He watched her look at the paper as though it might bite. 200 guineas was a great deal of money. It was, he knew from his man of business, a little more than the whole of the last mortgage interest owing on Cheldon that quarter. He had chosen the sum with care and had made it defensible, a real fee for a real folio, nothing that could be called a gift. But she was clever, and she would see that it was also, precisely, salvation, and she would be suspicious of it exactly because it was. 40 plates, she said slowly, drawn from the living plant, would require me to be at Everscroft through the flowering season. There is a dower house on the grounds, unused, quite separate from the great house, with its own establishment. My aunt, Lady Constance Thorne, keeps her own apartments at Everscroft and would be glad, I think, of company. She complains of the quiet. You and your sister and Mrs. Pettigrew, if she would honor us, might be lodged there with perfect propriety, and you might work in the gardens as it suited you. I would not be much about. I am in town on business a good part of the summer." He saw her understand the shape of what he was offering, which was not merely money but a roof, a distance from the whispering town, an occupation, and a footing, a way to be somewhere other than a jilted woman in a borrowed bedroom in Mount Street with her ruin the talk of the season. He saw her understand it, and he saw her hate needing it. "Why?" she said. "I told you why at the ball. I could not stand still. This is what standing still would have cost me, so I am not standing still. That is the whole of it, Miss Weatherby. It is not more romantic than that, and I would be lying if I dressed it up, and you have had enough of men dressing things up." "You would be lying," she repeated, and something in her face eased a very little, "if you dressed it up. Your Grace, do you know, that is the first thing anyone has said to me in a fortnight that I believe." "Then believe this also. If at any time the arrangement displeases you, you may end it, keep the fee earned, and go, and I will not think the worse of you nor make it known, and you will owe me nothing. I do not buy people. I am only trying to pay one honestly for good work while doing myself the incidental credit of annoying every person who laughed at you on Tuesday night, which I confess I shall enjoy." Henrietta, in the corner, made a small strangled sound, and was quelled by a look from Mrs. Pettigrew. Rosalind was quiet for a long moment. Then she picked up the folded terms and read them through slowly from beginning to end, the way a woman reads who has learned what happens when one does not read the whole of a thing. And Sebastian watched her read and thought that he had never in his life watched anyone read a legal paper with such complete attention, and that he liked it. When she had finished, she folded it again and set it down. "The plates will be good," she said. "You should not commission them if you want them flattering. I draw what is there. If a rose is blown or blighted, I draw it blown or blighted. Mr. Aldous said I had no sense of the picturesque, and he was right, and if that is not what you want you had better tell me now." "I have had a lifetime of the picturesque, Miss Weatherby," Sebastian said, "and I find I want the thing that is there. Draw it as it is." "Then I accept." It was as simple as that in the end, and as complicated. He did not stay above the quarter hour he had asked for. He took his leave of Mrs. Pettigrew, who saw him to the door herself, which the maid told Henrietta afterward she had not done for any living soul in 11 years, and who said to him quietly on the step, "You have surprised me, your grace." "I do not surprise. Mind you do not surprise me the other way at the end of it. I should not like to bury my good opinion of you along with everything else I have had to bury." And Sebastian, who found he liked the terrible old woman a great deal, said, "I will mind it, ma'am," and meant it. The party removed to Everscroft in the last week of June. Sebastian was not there when they arrived. He had arranged not to be, judging that Rosalind would settle more easily without the weight of him in the house, and he spent the first fortnight of their residence in town and at his estates in the north, hearing of Everscroft only through letters. His aunt Lady Constance, a widow of 60 with a passion for cards and gossip and a heart a good deal softer than her manner, wrote him long letters in a spidery hand. The Weatherby girls were charming. The elder was odd, silent, always out in the gardens at dawn with a folding stool and a box of colors, sunburnt as a gypsy, would not be flattered, would not be idle, had reorganized the Dower House accounts in an afternoon and found the housekeeper cheating and dealt with it herself without fuss. The younger was a delight and played the pianoforte badly and laughed at everything. The old aunt won at cards and was the best company Lady Constance had had in a decade. And Lady Constance wrote, in a postscript underlined twice, "All the county is talking of nothing else, Sebastian, and half of them think you have run mad and the other half think you very sly. And I have not corrected either party because I do not myself know which is right, and I wish you would come home and tell me." He came home in the second week of July. He arrived in the long gold light of a summer evening, and rather than go up to the house, he sent his horse to the stables and walked out through the gardens, and he found her before she knew he was there. She was at the far end of the old rose walk, on her folding stool, a broad straw hat shading her face, absorbed in the drawing on her knee, and she had colors on her fingers and a smudge of green along one cheekbone, and she was frowning at a full-blown crimson rose with an expression of such fierce concentration that Sebastian stopped on the gravel and did not speak, because he did not wish to end it. He had thought of her a good deal in the fortnight, more than he had meant to, and he had told himself the thinking was responsibility, the natural attention a man gives to an obligation he has taken up. Standing at the end of the rose walk in the gold light, watching a sunburnt woman frown at a flower, he understood that it was not responsibility, and the understanding went through him quietly and completely, like the turning of a key. She looked up and saw him and did not startle. She only regarded him a moment, and then she said, "Your Grace, you are wanted in this. Come and tell me. Is this rose crimson or is it nearer carmine? I have been arguing with it for an hour and it will not settle, and Lady Constance says she cannot tell one red from another, which I do not believe, for she certainly tells a red king from a red queen quick enough." Sebastian came and stood behind her stool and looked at the rose and at the plate on her knee, on which the rose stood already half-made, exact and unflinching and beautiful. A real rose with a curling brown edge to one outer petal that a lesser hand would have left out. "Carmine," he said, "in this light, crimson at noon. My mother used to say that particular rose could not make up its mind and she loved it the better for it. It has no name. She meant to name it and never did." Rosalind was quiet. Then she said, not looking up, "You might name it now." "I have no gift for names." "Neither had your mother, apparently, or it would have one." A small silence. "I will leave a space on the plate. When you have thought of a name, you will tell me and I will letter it in. There is no hurry. It is only a rose." It was only a rose. Sebastian stood behind her stool in the gold light while she went back to arguing with the color, and he thought that he had built his whole life to keep exactly this from happening, this quiet undoing, this being wanted for something small and true. And he thought of the churchyard in the north, and the woman he had not been permitted to love, and of the 10 cold years, and he found that for once the memory did not close over him like water. It sat beside him on the warm gravel and was only sad, as an old grief is sad, and let him go. "Rosalind," he said, and it was the first time he had used her name, and he heard her pencil stop. "Are you content here? Truly. I do not want a polite answer. Your great-aunt made me promise not to surprise her the other way at the end, and I mean to keep it, and I cannot keep it if you are unhappy and too proud to say." She was quiet a moment. Then she set down the pencil and looked up at him from under the straw hat, and her gray eyes in the low light were clear and steady, and for once entirely unguarded. "I am content," she said. "I did not expect to be. I expected to be got through the summer like a charity, and to be grateful and to hate being grateful. Instead I have work I am good at, and my sister laughs all day, and my father's letters are less frightened because the interest is paid, and no one here looks at me as though I were a broken thing to be pitied. Your aunt treats me as though I were sensible, which no one has done since my mother died. And you—" she stopped. "You come and argue about roses and do not flatter me and do not stand too close, and you went away for a fortnight so that I might settle, which I understood and thought kind, and did not thank you for. I am content, your grace. I am more content than I have been in 3 years, and it frightens me, because I have learned what it costs to lean my weight on a thing, and I am leaning, and I know how this ends." "How does it end?" Sebastian said quietly. "You will marry some earl's daughter with 40,000 pounds, as you must, and I will finish your roses and go back to Cheldon and manage the drainage, and it will have been the best summer of my life, and I shall be glad of it, and I shall not let myself mind." She picked up the pencil again. Her hand was quite steady. "That is how it ends. Now go up to the house, your grace. You are casting a shadow on my Carmen, and Lady Constance will want her cards." Sebastian looked down at the top of the straw hat for a moment longer. Then he said, "You are wrong about the ending," and he walked up through the gardens to the house in the last of the gold light, and he did not see, because his back was turned, that Rosalind Weatherby sat very still on her folding stool for a long time after he had gone, with her unfinished rose on her knee and her steady hand at last not steady at all. The house learned her before Sebastian did, which he found, when he considered it afterward, was very like her. He had it from his steward first, a dry, cautious man named Prewitt, who had served Everscroft 20 years and praised nothing. Prewitt came to him in the 2nd week, with an air of a man reporting a small marvel he did not quite approve of. Miss Weatherby, he said, had noticed within a fortnight what Prewitt himself had missed for a 12-month, that the head gardener's orders of stock and seed had been running steadily high, and the surplus going out a side gate on market mornings, and the money not coming back. She had not gone to Prewitt with it, nor to the Duke. She had gone to the head gardener himself, a proud old man of 40 years' service, and she had shown him the figures she had copied out quietly in her own hand, and she had given him a choice, that he might set the account straight himself, and she would say nothing to anyone ever, and the thing would end there. Or she would take the figures to the steward, and he would be dismissed without a character after 40 years, and his grandchildren would go hungry. The old man had wept and set the account straight, and had become, Prewitt reported with grudging wonder, the most honest and devoted servant on the estate, and had begun leaving the finest of the early roses at the door of the dower house, unasked, every morning, and would not say why. "She might have had him turned off, your grace," Prewitt said. "She might have come to me and made herself a great figure by catching him. Most would. She caught him and let him keep his place and his pride and made him hers for life instead of making an example of him. I have not seen the like. I do not rightly know what to make of a person who would rather mend a man than break him when breaking him would do her more credit. Sebastian said he did not rightly know either, which was a lie. He knew exactly, and the knowing sat warm in his chest all that day. He watched the same thing happen in a dozen quiet ways as the summer deepened. She learned the names of the dower house servants and their troubles in a week, and had, without seeming to try, reorganized the muddled linen accounts and settled a long feud between the cook and the still-room maid by the simple expedient of listening to both of them, which no one had troubled to do in years. She was up before the servants and made her own tea and would not be waited on, and this, which in another fine lady would have been an affectation, was in her plainly only the habit of a woman who had run a great house on no money and learned to need no one, and the servants, who can tell the difference in an instant, loved her for it. And she was making the summer over for her sister, too. Henrietta Weatherby had come to Everscroft, a bright, unhappy girl of 17, brittle under her laughter, having watched her sister's ruin and her family's fall, and being old enough to understand it and too young to do anything. And she had been, Lady Constance reported, all sharp edges and forced gaiety for the first fortnight. Rosalind had set her, without fuss, to the copying of the botanical descriptions for the folio, real work, exact and demanding, and Henrietta, given for the first time in 3 years a thing to be good at, had steadied and softened week by week into the delightful creature Lady Constance wrote of in her letters. Sebastian understood the strategy of it, having watched Rosalind do the same for the gardener and the cook, and he suspected for himself. She healed people by needing them, by giving them a use, by handing them back their own competence. She had done it to a whole household in a summer without anyone quite noticing they had been done to. There was that August the beginning of a small romance in it too, which Sebastian watched with private amusement. His aunt's godson, a young clergyman named Mr. Thornbury, who held the Everscroft living and dined at the great house on Sundays, a serious, mild young man of good family and small fortune, had fallen quietly and completely in love with Henrietta over the copying of Latin descriptions, and Henrietta, who had come to Everscroft certain that love was a thing that ruined women in ballrooms, had been surprised by the plain devotion of a man who wanted nothing of her but her company and admired nothing so much as her steadiness with a difficult text. Sebastian said nothing and let it grow. Rosalind, he was fairly sure, had arranged the whole of it, or if not arranged, it had certainly declined to prevent it, and he thought that a woman who could catch a thief without breaking him and mend a shattered household by needing it, and quietly make a good marriage for her sister out of a folio of roses, was a woman he would be glad, and a little afraid, to spend his life beside. He said as much to Lady Constance one evening, and his aunt looked at him over her cards and said, "You are afraid of her because she does not need you, Sebastian. Every woman who has thrown herself at you these 10 years has needed you, or wanted what you have, and you have grown so used to being needed that a person who does not need you at all is a great novelty and a little terrifying. It is the best thing that has ever happened to you. Play your card, my dear, you are wool-gathering, and I mean to beat you badly." And Sebastian played his card and was beaten badly, and thought that his aunt was right, and that being loved by someone who did not need him was worth more than being needed by everyone who did not love him, and that he had spent 10 cold years getting the two things confused. Sebastian did not go north again that summer. He told himself there was business enough at Everscroft to keep him, the harvest and the tenancies and a dispute over a mill lease, and it was true, and it was not the reason, and he had never in his life been in the habit of lying to himself, and did not intend to begin now. The reason walked in the gardens every morning with a folding stool and came in at noon with green on her fingers, and the reason had told him plainly that she knew how the thing must end, and he had told her plainly that she was wrong, and neither of them had spoken of it since, and it hung between them through the long gold weeks like the scent of the roses, present in every room whether it was named or not. They fell into a manner of living that Sebastian, examining it, could not remember having with any other human creature. He would ride out early to the mill or the North Farms and come back at noon, and she would be in the gardens, and he would go and stand at the end of the Rose Walk, and she would tell him without preamble what she was fighting with that day. The impossible white of a particular rose that was not white at all but a dozen colors pretending to be white, the way a leaf turned its back to the light. He knew nothing of drawing and cared nothing for flowers, and he found he could listen to her talk of both for an hour and be sorry when the bell went for luncheon. She never asked him about himself, which he found restful. She had a delicacy about the private places of a person that he understood to be the courtesy of one who had had her own private places trampled through in public. And he never asked her about Crispin Marlowe, whose name neither of them spoke, though he knew from Lady Constance that the wedding of Marlowe to the Pembroke heiress was set for September, and the town was full of it. He learned her by watching, which was the only way she would be learned. He learned that she rose before the servants and made her own tea and would not be waited on if she could help it. He learned that she read the estate's newspaper for the corn prices and the shipping and not the society columns, that she could add a long column of figures in her head, that she had reorganized not only the Dower House accounts but, gently and without seeming to, the whole muddled system by which the head gardener ordered his stock, saving Sebastian's steward £100 a year and never mentioning it to anyone. He had it from the steward, who was awed. He learned that she loved her sister with a fierce protective tenderness and her difficult father with a loyalty that had cost her everything, and that she did not regret. And he learned slowly the shape of the wound Crispin Marlowe had left, which was not, he came to see, the loss of the man himself whom she had never greatly loved, but the loss of her own certainty, the discovery that she had been, to the man she meant to marry, an asset that had depreciated and could be written off in public for profit, and that no one in the world had stood up in the room to say it was wrong. He had stood up in the room. He thought about that a good deal. It was Lady Constance who forced the matter into the open, as Sebastian supposed he ought to have foreseen, his aunt being a woman who could not bear a card unplayed. She waylaid him in the library one wet afternoon in early August, shut the door, sat down opposite him with the air of a general and said, "Sebastian, I am going to ask you a vulgar question, and you are going to answer it, because I have loved you since you were an hour old and I have watched you turn to ice for 10 years, and I will not watch you throw away the one thing that has thawed you out of a mistaken idea of what is owed. Do you mean to marry that girl, or do you not?" Sebastian set down his pen. "You are direct today, aunt." "I am 70. I have no time to be otherwise. Answer me." "I mean to marry her," Sebastian said, and heard himself say it and found it was true and had been true, he thought, since the Rose Walk in the gold light, perhaps since the ballroom. "If she will have me, which is by no means certain." Lady Constance sat back. Whatever she had expected, it was not so plain a yes. He saw her rearrange herself around it. "Well," she said, "well, then why in heaven's name have you not spoken?" "Because," Sebastian said, "she believes I am going to marry an earl's daughter with £40,000 as I must, and finish the roses and send her back to Cheldon, and she has arranged her whole heart around that belief in order to survive the summer, and if I speak too soon she will not believe me. She has been lied to by an ardent man before. She has been offered a great deal and had it withdrawn in public. If I go to her now and say I love you, she will hear the Duke has tired of the game and wishes to be amused, or worse, that I pity her and dress the pity as love, and she will refuse me, and she will be right to refuse me because she cannot yet tell the difference between what I feel and what has been done to her before, and neither, if I am honest, could I in her place." He rose and went to the window and the rain. "I do not want to win her, aunt. Winning is what Marlowe did, and unwinning. I want her to be sure. I want her so sure that when the whole world tells her a duke does not marry a ruined baronet's daughter, and they will tell her loudly she does not so much as blink. That cannot be got by speaking. It can only be got by time, and by my being every day exactly what I have said I am, until she believes the evidence of her own eyes over the evidence of her whole hard history. I am courting her, aunt. I am only doing it slowly and without words, because words are the thing she cannot trust." There was a long silence. The rain ran down the glass. When Sebastian turned round, his aunt was looking at him with an expression he had not seen on her face since his mother's funeral, when he was 19. "I have misjudged you, Sebastian," she said at last, unsteadily. "All these years I thought the ice had gone all the way through. I am glad, more glad than I can say, to find I was wrong, but—" She gathered herself. "But you cannot have all the time in the world, my dear, however wise your slowness. The world will not hold still for you. There is talk already, a great deal of it, and not all of it kind, and there are people who will make it their business to spoil this precisely because it is good. You should know that Lady Vivienne Carstaill has taken a house not 4 miles off for the shooting season, and means to call, and has been telling everyone who will listen that she and you had an understanding these 2 years, which you and I know to be a fiction of her own weaving, but which she believes hard enough to act on." Sebastian's mouth thinned. Lady Vivienne Carstaill was the widowed daughter of a marquis, handsome, clever, and cold, who had decided some years ago that she would be the Duchess of Everscroft, and had pursued the object with the patience of a chess player. He had given her not the smallest encouragement. He knew that mattered not at all. "Let her call," he said. "She will not call to be pleasant, Sebastian. She will call to take the measure of the girl and to find her weakness and to use it. I know the breed. I was very nearly the breed myself before your uncle married me and spoiled me for it." Lady Constance rose and came to him and put her small dry hand on his arm. "Be a little quicker than you mean to be, my dear. That is all I ask. The wise slow course is right, and I honor you for it, but there are wolves in the wood, and the girl does not know it, and you do." The wolf called 4 days later. Sebastian was returning from the mill when he saw the strange carriage at the door, and he knew the crest, and he felt something cold settle in him. He gave his horse to a groom and went in through the garden way, meaning to reach the drawing-room before harm was done, and he was too late, because Lady Vivienne Carstaill had not troubled to wait in the drawing-room. She had, learning from the footman that the Weatherby ladies were lodged in the dower house and Miss Weatherby to be found in the gardens, walked out into the gardens herself, and Sebastian, coming quiet along the yew hedge, heard her voice before he saw her, pitched low and pleasant and carrying, and he stopped, because he understood at once that the greatest service he could do Rosalind was to hear what was being done to her. "Such a charming arrangement," Lady Vivienne was saying, "and so like Everscroft's kindness. He has always had these little projects, you know. There was a music master's daughter 2 years ago, a genuine talent. He set her up quite handsomely, and a young man he sent to Italy to paint, and I forget how many others. He grows fond of them and he tires, and he is always generous at the end. One must say that for him. He does not leave them worse than he found them. Better, usually. You will do very well out of it, my dear, I have no doubt, and the plates will be charming, and when it is over you will have your 200 guineas and a great deal of experience of a great house, and you will marry some worthy clergyman and tell your children you once drew roses for a duke. It is quite the prettiest of all his little kindnesses. I do think this is the prettiest." Sebastian could not see Rosalind's face. He could see the straw hat, quite still, and the folding stool, and the drawing board on her knee, and he could see that she had not put down her pencil, and he thought, "She is doing what she did in the ballroom. She is holding herself so still that the still is the only answer she can bear to give." "You are very good to warn me, Lady Vivienne," Rosalind said, and her voice was level and pleasant and gave nothing at all. "I had understood the commission to be for 40 plates, of which I have done 19. When they are finished I shall be glad to have drawn the roses, whatever comes after. They are very fine roses. His Grace's mother chose well." His Grace's mother. Lady Vivienne's voice warmed with a terrible sympathy. "Yes, poor Sebastian, he is sentimental about his mother's roses. It is the one soft place in him. I dare say that is why he chose this particular kindness for you. The roses gave him the excuse. You mustn't refine upon it, my dear. He is sentimental about the flowers, not about the florist, if you take my meaning, and it would be a great pity, would it not, a very great pity, if you were to mistake the one for the other. A woman in your position cannot afford another public mistake. I say it only in kindness. I say it because no one else will." It was, Sebastian thought, standing rigid behind the yew, exquisitely done. It was so well done that he could not, coming out now to defend Rosalind, undo any of it. His coming out would only prove Lady Vivienne's point, would make him the great man rushing to shield his little project, would make Rosalind the object of a scene again, the pitied thing, exactly what she could not bear. Lady Vivienne had built the trap so that the more he tried to spring it, the tighter it closed. The only person who could refuse this was Rosalind herself, and Lady Vivienne had counted on her being unable to, had counted on the wound Marlowe left, had counted on the whole hard history that made a kindness impossible to trust. He did not come out. It was the hardest thing he had done in 10 years, harder than crossing the ballroom, and he did it because he understood at last, standing behind the hedge with his hands closed into fists, that the wise slow course he had explained so well to his aunt had a price he had not reckoned, and the price was this, that he must stand still and silent while a cruel, clever woman poured poison into the ear of the person he loved, and trust that the roots he had spent a summer growing would hold. He had said to Rosalind at the very first, "I could not stand still." Now the whole thing turned on whether he could. "Lady Vivienne," Rosalind said, and there was something new in her voice now, still level, still pleasant, but with an edge under it like the browned petal she would not leave out of a drawing. "I am going to say a thing, and I hope you will forgive me for saying it, as I have forgiven you a good deal in the last quarter hour. I have been ruined in public once already this season. I assure you I know exactly what it costs, and exactly how little a woman in my position can afford, better than you can teach me. So I have learned to look very hard at things, because I cannot afford not to. And when I look at the Duke of Everscroft, I do not see a man who is sentimental about flowers and careless of people. I see a man who went away for a fortnight so that a stranger might settle in his house without the weight of him, and who argues with me about the color of a rose and loses on purpose so that I may win, and who has never once, in 6 weeks, stood too close or said one word he could not prove. I do not know how the summer ends. You may be right. But I find I trust the evidence of my own eyes over the report of a lady I met a quarter of an hour ago, however kindly meant. And now I must go on with the Carmen, for the light is going, and I have 19 plates done and only the summer to do the rest." There was a silence in the garden that Sebastian would remember all his life. Then Lady Vivienne said, "How spirited," in a voice from which every trace of warmth had gone, and there was the crunch of her step on the gravel going away, and Sebastian pressed himself back into the yew and let her pass without seeing him, and stood a long while after the carriage had gone, in the failing light, listening to the small sounds of Rosalind Weatherby taking up her colors again at the end of the rose walk, and he found that his eyes were wet, which had not happened to him since the churchyard in the north, and he let it happen, and did not wipe them, and was not ashamed. She had not needed defending, she had defended him. He did not go to her that evening. He understood that she would not want it known she had been tried, and that his coming would tell her he had heard, and rob her of the small dignity of having stood alone and won. But he sent, by a garden boy with no note, a single perfect bloom of the nameless rose, cut and carried in a glass of water, and he trusted her to understand it, and she did. Lady Constance told him at dinner that Miss Weatherby had put a rose in a glass on her drawing table, and would not say where it came from, and had smiled to herself over it in a manner Lady Constance had never once seen, and had gone back to her work humming, and had lettered something at last into the empty space she had left on the 11th plate. Sebastian said nothing, and ate his dinner, and later, when the house was quiet, he walked down to the dark rose walk alone and stood where her stool had been, and he thought that he had told his aunt the world would not hold still for him, and here it was not holding still. The wolves were in the wood exactly as she had said, and that he could not, after all, have all the time he wanted. But he thought, too, that the thing he had spent the summer growing had held, at the first hard frost it had held, and that he had his answer, or the beginning of it, and that it was better than any he could have won by speaking. The space on the 11th plate she had left for him to name the rose, and had lettered something into at last. He did not know yet what she had written there. He found he could hardly wait for morning to find out, and the impatience, in a man who had felt nothing in particular for 10 years, was so strange and so sweet that he laughed out loud, once, alone in the dark garden, and startled a nightingale into silence. The rose on the 11th plate she had named Constancy, and lettered in her small exact hand beneath the crimson carmine bloom that could not make up its mind, and when Sebastian saw it the next morning he stood a long time over the drawing board and did not trust himself to speak. It was not his name for it. It was hers. And it was, he understood, an answer to Lady Vivienne given in the only tongue Rosalind entirely trusted, the tongue of the work. The man who is sentimental about flowers and careless of people had been quietly told that she had decided otherwise. He did not say anything about the name. He only asked her that noon whether she would ride out with him to see the water meadows which she had never seen, and which were at their best in August, and she looked at him a moment and set down her pencil and said yes. They rode out most fine days after that, and it was, Sebastian thought, the nearest thing to happiness he had known since before the churchyard, and he was careful with it as a man is careful carrying water in his hands. He did not speak of marriage, but the courtship, which had been made of standing at the end of the Rose Walk, became now a courtship of long rides and longer talk, and the talk went deeper. He told her, one afternoon on the ridge above the water meadows, with the whole green county laid out below them, the thing he had told no one in 10 years. About the woman in the north, the steward's daughter he had loved at 19, forbidden by his father, married off in haste to a farmer 40 miles away and dead of a fever within the year, and buried in a churchyard he had visited once at night, and never again, and how he had decided at her grave that he would not love where the world could take it from him, and had kept the decision for a decade, and had built a reputation of ice to make the keeping easier. Rosalind listened, and did not offer him comfort which he could not have borne, and did not pity him, which she knew he could not bear. When he had finished she was quiet a while, looking out over the meadows, and then she said, "And now the world may take this from you too, and you know it, and you are doing it anyway. That is either very brave or very foolish, your grace, and I have not decided which, and I do not think you have either." "I have decided," Sebastian said. "It is both." She laughed, then really laughed, the first time he had heard it, a low, warm, surprised sound, and he turned his horse a little so that he might watch her do it, and she caught him watching, and the laugh faded but the warmth did not, and for a moment on the ridge with the wind moving the long grass neither of them said anything at all, and Sebastian thought, I could speak now, and did not, because he had promised himself she should be sure, and she was not sure yet. He could see she was not. There was still under the warmth a wariness, a hand held ready to catch itself, and he loved her the more for the wariness, and held his peace, and they rode home in a silence that was the most companionable he had ever kept with a living soul. It should have gone on so until the roses were done and he might speak, and perhaps it would have if the world had held still. It did not hold still. It broke in from the outside, as Lady Constance had warned, and it broke in through the person of Crispin Marlowe, whose September wedding to the Pembroke heiress had not, after all, taken place. Sebastian had it first from his man of business, in a letter forwarded from town, and he read it twice to be sure he understood it, and then he sat for a while with the letter in his hand. The Pembroke fortune was gone, or the greater part of it. Old Pembroke had speculated the family money into a canal scheme and a run of ships, and both had failed within the month, and the heiress was an heiress no longer but the penniless daughter of a bankrupt, and Crispin Marlowe, who had thrown over a woman of no fortune to marry a woman of £40,000, found himself contracted to a woman of no fortune at all, and had done what such men do. He had cried off. He had ended the engagement to the Pembroke girl as publicly and coldly as he had ended the engagement to Rosalind, and the town, which had a memory, was enjoying the symmetry enormously. And Crispin Marlowe, ruined in reputation, wanted for nothing now so much as a way to mend it, and had cast about, and had lit upon the one arrangement that might mend it entirely, and had begun, the man of business wrote, to tell a story. The story was this. that he and Rosalind Weatherby had never truly parted, that the scene at the Harringworth ball had been a misunderstanding cruelly seized upon, that he had always meant to make it up with her, that the Duke of Everscroft had, in the interval, taken advantage of a vulnerable young woman and installed her at his estate under a pretense of employment, and that he, Crispin Marlowe, the wronged and constant lover, meant to do the honorable thing and rescue her from a compromising situation by renewing his addresses. It was a lie so complete and so self-serving that Sebastian, reading it, felt something close to admiration for its architecture. It made Marlowe the hero. It made Rosalind the victim. It made Sebastian the villain. And it was calculated to be believed, because it flattered every prejudice the world already held. That a duke does not employ a baronet's daughter innocently, that a ruined woman in a great man's dower house is a kept woman by another name, that constancy in a discarded lover is more romantic than the plain fact of his having been discarded for money, and taken back only when the money failed. "He means to call here," Sebastian said aloud, to the empty library, and knew it for truth as he said it. Marlowe would come to Everscroft. He would come with his renewed addresses and his air of injured constancy, and he would come, if Sebastian knew the breed, at a time and in a manner calculated to be seen, so that whatever Rosalind answered, the story might be dressed to his advantage. If she refused him, he was the constant lover spurned by a woman corrupted by a duke's attentions. If by some horror she accepted, he was restored. He had made a game in which he could not lose and Rosalind could not win, exactly as Lady Vivienne had, and Sebastian understood with a cold clarity that these were the same weapon aimed from two directions, and that the wood was full of wolves indeed, and that the thing he had grown all summer was about to be tested past anything Lady Vivienne's poison had tested it. His first instinct was to prevent Marlowe from ever reaching the door, to have him turn back at the gates, to write to him, to crush the thing with the whole weight of a dukedom before it could touch Rosalind. He had the power to do it. He sat with the power in his hand for a long hour in the darkening library, and in the end he did not use it, and the not using was the second hardest thing he did that summer, harder even than standing behind the yew. Because he understood, at last and all the way through, the shape of what he had told his aunt in this same room a month before. He had said he wanted Rosalind so sure that when the whole world told her a duke does not marry a ruined baronet's daughter, she would not so much as blink. He could not give her that certainty by fighting her battles for her behind her back. If he crushed Marlowe before she ever knew, he would only prove to her in the deepest place where the wound was, that she was a thing to be managed by powerful men for her own good, an asset to be protected, exactly what she had been to her father's creditors and to Marlowe himself. He would win her safety and lose the one thing that mattered, which was that she should choose freely with her eyes open, knowing everything. So he did a harder thing than crushing Marlowe. He told her the truth. He asked her to walk with him the next morning in the Rose Walk, and he told her all of it plainly, without softening. That the Pembroke fortune had failed, that Marlowe had jilted the heiress, that Marlowe was telling a story in which he was her constant lover and Sebastian her seducer, and that Marlowe meant to come to Everscroft and renew his addresses in whatever manner best served the story. He watched her face as he told it, and he saw the color leave it, and he saw the old stillness come down over her like a visor, the ballroom stillness, and it cut him to see it, but he went on to the end. "I could stop him," Sebastian said. "I could have him turned from the gates and never troubled. I have not, and I will not unless you ask it, and I will tell you why, and you may think me a fool or worse. Because if I fight this for you without your knowing, I make you again a thing that men arrange the world around, and I will not do that to you, not even to keep you safe, because being kept safe by a powerful man against your will is a part of what was done to you, and I will not be one more man who does it. So I have told you everything. He is coming. What you do about it is yours to do. If you wish him refused at the gate, say so, and it is done. If you wish to receive him and refuse him yourself, I will see that you may do it with every protection of propriety, and not one whisper against you. If you wish," and here his voice was not quite steady, and he let it not be, If you wish to receive him and hear what he says and consider it, that too is yours, and I will abide it. Though I will not pretend it would not cost me a great deal, because I have not been honest with you about one thing, and I find I must be honest about it now, whatever it does to your certainty. I love you, Rosalind. I have loved you since the rose walk, perhaps since the ballroom. I meant to say nothing until the roses were done and you were sure of me, so that you should never doubt it was love and not pity or a whim or a great man's game. I am saying it now, too soon and at the worst possible moment, because Marlowe has made a game in which I cannot protect you without taking your choice from you, and I would rather lose you choosing freely than keep you by managing your life. That is everything. That is the whole of it. I have no more to say and no card left to play. It is yours. He had never in his life laid himself so open. He stood in the rose walk among the blown late roses and waited, and Rosalind Weatherby looked at him for a long moment with her gray eyes, and he could not read her at all, and the not reading was a torment he had brought on himself and would not have undone. "You have chosen a strange moment," she said at last, very low, "to tell me you love me. I know it. You might have told me on the ridge when I laughed, and I should have believed you, because there was nothing else in the world just then to make me doubt it. Now you have told me at the exact moment when a man I once meant to marry is coming to say he loves me too and always has, and I am to believe you and not him, and choose, with my eyes open, as you say, knowing that half the world will call me a duke's kept woman whichever I choose. You have not made it easy, Sebastian." It was the first time she had used his name. He held very still. "No," he said, "I have made it true. Easy and true are not often the same thing. You taught me that, drawing the brown petal you would not leave out." She turned away from him and walked a little way down the rose walk, and stood with her back to him, one hand rising to press flat against her side the way it had pressed flat against gray silk in the ballroom. And he understood that she was trembling, and that she was mastering it, and he made himself not go to her, because going to her would be one more powerful man arranging her, and he had promised. "I need to think," she said without turning. "You have given me everything at once, the truth and the danger and your heart, all in the same quarter hour, and I cannot hold it all at once. I need to think, and I need to think alone, and I need you not to help me, which I know is the one thing you least want to do, and which is therefore the thing I most need you to do. Will you give me that?" "Yes," Sebastian said. It came out rough. "Yes, take what you need. I will be at the house. He will not reach these gardens without your leave, that much I will do, and I do not think you will call it managing you, for it is only a door. Everything past the door is yours." "Thank you." A silence. Then, still without turning, in a voice he had to strain to hear, "Sebastian, I am glad you told me. I do not know yet what I shall do, and I will not pretend I do to comfort you. But I am glad you told me the true way at the hard moment, instead of the easy way that would have been a kind of lie. No one has ever paid me the compliment of the truth before, when a lie would have served them better. You have done it twice now. I shall remember it, whatever comes." And she walked away down the rose walk among the late blown roses and did not look back. And Sebastian Thorne stood among his mother's flowers in the September light and let her go, having given away, in a single quarter hour, every defense he had spent 10 years building. And he did not know, watching her small straight figure grow distant against the yew, whether he had won her or lost her, and he found that he would not, if he could, have taken back one word, and that this, more than anything that had come before, was how he knew that what he felt was real. She thought for 2 days, as she had said she must, and Sebastian let her, which was the hardest waiting of his life. He did not go to the rose walk. He rode out early each morning to the far farms and stayed away till dusk, so that she should not feel him hovering, and he came back each night to hear from Lady Constance only that Miss Weatherby had been very quiet, and had walked a great deal alone, and had not touched her drawing, which frightened him more than anything, because in all the summer he had never known her to leave the work. On the evening of the second day he could not eat, and went out after dinner into the gardens in the last of the light, telling himself only that he wished air, and he found her at the end of the rose walk in the dusk, not on her stool, but standing, looking at the nameless rose she had named Constancy, and he stopped, and would have gone away again to leave her in peace, but she had heard him and turned. "I have not been drawing," she said. "Your aunt will have told you I could not. I have been thinking, and one cannot draw and think at the same time. The drawing takes the whole of a person, that is why I love it. So I have not drawn in 2 days, and it has been like going without bread, and I have decided that whatever else I do with my life I cannot do it without the work, and that is one thing I know now that I did not know before, and it is your doing, so I thank you for it." Sebastian came a little nearer carefully and stopped where he had stopped that first gold evening. "And the other things," he said. "Have you decided the other things?" "No, not all of them. I have decided one." She was quiet a moment, looking at the rose. "I have decided that I believe you. That was the thing I could not tell at first, standing among the roses when you told me you loved me at the worst possible moment. I could not tell whether I believed it because it was true or because I wished it were, and those are very different things, and I have wished things were true before and been made a fool of. So I have spent 2 days looking at the evidence. The way I look at a rose I mean to draw hard, without flattering it, to see the thing that is there. And the evidence is that you went away for a fortnight so I might settle, that you have never once stood too close, that you told me the truth about Marlowe when a lie would have kept me safer and nearer to you. That when I refused Lady Vivienne in the garden, and I know you were behind the yew, Sebastian, I heard the gravel. When I refused her you did not come out to help me, though it must have half killed you, because you understood that helping me would have unmade me. A man who wanted to keep me would have come out. A man who loved me stood still and let me stand alone and win. I have looked and looked, and every piece of the evidence says the same thing, which is that you love me in the one way I did not know a person could be loved, which is by being trusted to stand on my own feet. And so I believe you. That is the one thing I have decided." "That is a great deal," Sebastian said, and his voice was not steady. "It is not everything. I have not decided about Marlowe or the world, or whether I can bear to be a duchess and watched all my life by people who laughed at me, or whether I have the courage for any of it. Those I am still deciding. But I wanted you to know the one thing tonight, because you have been very brave and very patient, and you have not eaten, Lady Constance says, and it is not kind to keep a person in the dark about the one thing when you have decided it." She turned from the rose and looked at him fully in the failing light, and her gray eyes were clear. "I believe you love me, Sebastian. Whatever I decide about the rest, hold on to that, for it is true, and I do not say true things to be kind. Now go and eat something. And do not come to the Rose Walk tomorrow either. Marlowe will come when he comes, and when he does I will meet him myself, and I will meet the whole of it myself, and I need this last day to be sure of my own feet. Will you give me the one more day?" "I will give you anything," Sebastian said. "That is mine to give. And the one more day is yours, it was always yours." She smiled at him then, small and certain in the dusk, and it went through him like the turning of a key, and she said, "I know. That is why," and she walked away up the darkening rose walk, and Sebastian stood among his mother's flowers and found that he could eat after all, and that the waiting which was not over had become a different kind of waiting, the kind a man can bear, because she had given him the one true thing to hold, and he held it all that night and through the hard day that followed, and it did not fail him. Crispin Marlowe came to Everscroft 3 days later, and he came, as Sebastian had known he would, on the worst possible day and in the worst possible way, which was to say the day of Lady Constance's long-planned autumn dinner, when the house was full of the very county families whose opinion Marlowe's story was designed to poison, and he came not to the dower house door but up the great sweep to the front of the house itself, in a hired carriage got up to look like his own, at the exact hour when the guests were arriving, so that a dozen of the neighborhood should see the wronged and constant lover come to reclaim his own from the seducer Duke. Sebastian, warned by a footman, met him in the hall before he could get further, and the two men took each other's measure across the marble under the eyes of arriving guests who slowed and did not go in. Marlowe was handsomer than Sebastian had expected and younger, with an open, pleasant face that Sebastian understood at once to be his chief weapon. He looked exactly like a man who could not tell a lie, which was, in Sebastian's experience, precisely the face the best liars wore. "Your Grace," Marlowe said and bowed and pitched his voice to Carrie. "I will not pretend this is a comfortable call, and I am sorry to make it before your guests, but I have been given no honest way to make it privately, and a man must sometimes do an awkward thing for a worthy cause. I have come for Miss Weatherby. I understand she is lodged upon your grounds. I have loved her these 2 years, through a misunderstanding that shamed us both, and I am here to renew my addresses and to take her, if she will have me, out of a situation that, whatever your intentions, the world has begun to speak ill of. I make you no accusation. I only say that a woman's good name is a fragile thing, and that I am in a position to restore hers by marriage honorably, and that I believe any true friend to her would wish her to have the choice of it." It was, Sebastian thought, beautifully done, better even than Lady Vivienne. Every arriving guest in the hall had heard it. It cast Sebastian as either the seducer who would deny her the choice, or, if he permitted the interview, the great man magnanimously stepping aside. It cast Marlowe as the hero either way. There was no move Sebastian could make that Marlowe had not already turned to his advantage. To throw him out was to prove the story. To let him stay was to lend it credit. And behind it all, poisonous and clever, ran the true purpose, that whatever Rosalind said, the interview itself, held here before these witnesses, would forever fix her in the county's mind as a woman two men had contended for on a dower house lawn, a woman of doubtful situation, a woman whose name was a subject of contention rather than a fact beyond question. Marlowe did not need her to accept him. He needed only the scene. The scene was the weapon. The scene restored him and ruined her, and cost him nothing. Sebastian understood all of this in the space of 3 breaths, standing in his own hall with his guests frozen around him, and he understood too that everything he had built all summer had come to exactly this point, and that he must not, whatever it cost, take Rosalind's choice from her. He had promised her everything past the door was hers. He would keep it though it killed him. "Mr. Marlowe," he said, and he did not pitch his voice to Carrie. He let it be quiet so that they leaned to hear it, which is a thing a man of real power can do that a man performing power cannot. "You have made a pretty speech, and I will answer it plainly, as is my habit. Miss Weatherby is a guest upon my estate and a person of independent judgment, and whether she will see you is her affair and not mine and not these good people's. I will not deny you the door, for it is not my door to deny, and I will not urge you through it, for that is not my right either. I will send to ask her whether she wishes to receive you. If she does, you shall speak with her before her great aunt and my aunt as is proper, and no whisper against her shall stand while I have breath. If she does not, you will go, and you will go having had every courtesy, and the county may make of it what it likes. I have no story to tell them, Mr. Marlowe. I have never had a story. I find that a man with nothing to hide need not tell stories, and the want of one is sometimes remarked." He saw the shot go home, saw the small flicker in Marlowe's open, honest face, and he saw, too, the arriving guests exchange the smallest glances because a hit had been made and they had felt it. But it was not enough. It could not be enough because the scene itself was the weapon, and he had just consented to the scene, because to refuse it was to take Rosalind's choice, and he would not. He sent a footman running to the dower house, and the hall waited, and Sebastian stood among his silent guests and felt the whole summer balanced on the point of a needle. Rosalind came. She came across the lawn in the September light in her gray silk, alone, with her great aunt hurrying behind her and Lady Constance behind that, and she came into the great hall and looked at the assembled county and at Crispin Marlowe and at Sebastian, and Sebastian saw her take in a single gray glance, the whole architecture of the trap, the witnesses, the staged carriage, the pretty speech still hanging in the air. And he saw her understand that she had been maneuvered into a scene exactly as she had been maneuvered into a scene at the Harringworth ball, and that once again she was to be the woman standing alone in the middle of a floor with every eye upon her, while men and their arrangements decided what she was. And Sebastian, watching her understand it, did the last hard thing, the hardest of all. He said nothing. He did not go to her side. He did not so much as look a message at her. He stood back among his guests and left her the whole empty floor, because he had promised her that everything past the door was hers, and this was past the door. And if he stepped into it now to shield her, he would only be one more man arranging her rescue, and he had sworn he would not, though every nerve in his body strained to cross the marble as he had once crossed the ballroom. Rosalind stood alone in the middle of the hall, and then she smiled. It was not the ghost of a smile he had seen at the ballroom. It was a real one, small and certain, and it changed her whole face, and Sebastian's heart turned over to see it because he did not yet know what it meant. "Mr. Marlowe," she said, and her voice was level and pleasant and carried without seeming to try, the voice she had used on Lady Vivienne in the garden. "You have come a long way, and before a great many people, to say you have loved me these 2 years. I am going to answer you before the same people, since you have chosen them, so that there may be no misunderstanding of the kind that, as you say, shamed us both once before. Only this time I will make the scene, and you will stand in it, which I believe is nearer the truth of how these things have gone between us." A sound went through the watching county, quickly stilled. "You loved me," Rosalind went on, "for 1 year while my father's ruin was not yet certain, and you grew cool as it grew certain. And when Miss Pembroke's £40,000 came within your reach, you ended our engagement at a ball in public that all society might see you do it, because a public ending cannot be crept back from, and so protected your new arrangement. I have never told anyone that. I have borne it in silence, because a woman who complains is thought bitter. But you have come to my door with a pretty story of constancy, and constancy is a thing that can be checked against the record, and the record is that you were constant to Miss Pembroke's fortune until it failed, and constant to mine until it did, and are now constant to me again in the exact week that being married to somebody, anybody, of good family would mend a reputation you ruined yourself. That is not love, Mr. Marlowe. I have lately learned what love looks like, and it does not look like you. It looks like a man who tells a woman the hardest truth at the worst moment, because a comforting lie would be a kind of contempt. You have never in your life told me a hard truth. You have told me only the thing that served you, dressed as ardor. I know the difference now. I did not always. I do." Marlowe's open, honest face had gone white and then red. "Miss Weatherby, you are overwrought, you have been influenced. A woman in your situation." "My situation," Rosalind said, and here at last a little heat came into the level voice, "and it was terrible, is that I have spent a summer doing honest work I am proud of, in a house where I have been treated as a person of sense for the first time since my mother died, and you have come to tell these good people that my situation is a shameful one, in order to mend your own. That is a cruelty, Mr. Marlowe, and it is the second cruelty you have done me in public in one season, and I find, standing here, that I am done being cruel to in public. I refuse your addresses. I refuse them wholly and gladly and forever, and I ask you to leave this house, and I ask these good people to remember, when you tell your story of the constant lover and the seducer Duke, that they heard the woman herself, standing on her own feet in the middle of the floor, say that it was a lie. That is my answer. I have made no scene. You have made the scene. I have only, this time, refused to stand quietly in it." There was a silence in the great hall of Everscroft that Sebastian would hear in his memory for the rest of his life, and then Lady Constance began, very deliberately, to applaud, one pair of old hands clapping alone in the enormous quiet, and then Mrs. Pettigrew joined her, and then, incredibly, one of the county wives, and then another, and the applause spread across the hall like a wind across the water meadows. And Crispin Marlowe stood in the middle of it with his ruined, pretty story in pieces around him, and understood that he had made not the scene he had planned, but a scene that damned him, and turned, and walked out, and no one stopped him, and the sound of his hired carriage on the gravel was covered by the applause. Rosalind stood alone in the middle of the floor, and now she was trembling. Sebastian could see it, the reaction coming on her all at once, and he crossed the marble to her at last, because now, only now, it was not arranging her rescue but answering her choice, and he came and stood before her and bowed, the full unhurried bow he had given her in the ballroom, and offered her his arm. "Miss Weatherby," he said low for her alone, "you did not need me." "No," she said, and her voice shook. "I did not. That is the whole difference, Sebastian. Marlowe came to rescue me, and Lady Vivienne came to warn me, and my father sold me, and every man in my life has arranged me for my own good, and you stood back against the wall and left me the floor, though I could see it was killing you, and let me save myself. Do you know, I did not truly believe you until you did that. I believed you loved me. I did not believe you would ever let me stand alone in a hard place if you had the power to spare me it. And you did. You gave me the one thing no one has ever given me, which is the room to be my own rescue, and so. She put her hand on his arm and looked up at him, and the whole hall was watching, and she did not so much as glance at them, she looked only at him. And so my answer to you, Sebastian, since you were brave enough to ask it at the worst moment, is yes, if you meant it. If you still mean it, now that all the county has seen me be sharp and unwomanly and make a scene. I mean it, Sebastian said, the more for the scene. Marry me, Rosalind. Not to spite Marlowe, not to mend anything, not for the roses, though I will keep the roses all my life. Marry me because I have been ice for 10 years and you are the first warm thing I have wanted, and because you draw the browned petal you will not leave out, and because I could not stand still. Marry me. Yes, she said again, and this time it was steady. Yes. He did not kiss her. There were 40 people watching, and neither of them was made that way. He only lifted her hand and pressed his mouth to her gloved knuckles, and held it there a moment, and the county saw the Frost Duke, who had not danced in 6 years and had loved no one in 10, stand in his own hall and kiss the hand of Sir Edmund Weatherby's jilted daughter as though she were the only woman in England. And the story that went out from Everscroft that night was not the story Crispin Marlowe had meant to tell. It was a far better one, and it was true, which the best stories sometimes are. The county went home that night full of a story better than any they had brought, and the great house emptied of guests, and Everscroft settled into its evening quiet, and Sebastian found Rosalind at last where he had first truly seen her, at the end of the rose walk in the dark now, no stool, no colors, only the woman herself, standing among the late roses with her arms wrapped about herself as though she were cold, though the night was warm. He came and stood beside her without speaking. The nameless rose was a pale shape in the dark, constancy, crimson gone to black in the starlight, unable even now to make up its mind. I am shaking, she said at last, conversationally, as though remarking on the weather. I did not shake while it was happening. I never do. I go very still and I say the thing that must be said in a level voice, and everyone thinks I am made of iron, and then afterward, alone, I shake for an hour and no one ever sees it, because a woman who shakes afterward is thought weak, and I have not been able to afford to be thought weak in 3 years. I am telling you because you are going to be my husband, and I find I do not want to be iron with you. I have been iron with everyone for so long that I am not sure I remember how to be anything else. I am a little afraid I have forgotten. Sebastian looked at her pale profile in the dark. You have not forgotten, he said. You wept in my library over your father, and you are shaking now, and you have told me you are shaking, which is the opposite of iron. You are only out of practice. So am I have been ice for 10 years, which is iron's cold cousin, and I am also, I find, out of practice at being a warm creature, and I expect we shall both be clumsy at it for a while, and I do not mind because I would rather be clumsy and warm with you than perfect and cold alone, which is what I was, and what I mistook for strength for a very long time. She turned then and stepped into him, simply the way she had in the library, and he put his arms around her and held her while she shook, and this time she did not stop herself and he did not try to soothe her out of it. He only held her and let the shaking run its course under the late roses in the dark, and gradually it eased, and gradually she grew still against him, not the iron stillness but the other kind, the quiet of a thing that has come to rest. You did not need me today, Sebastian said into her hair. You said it yourself. Marlowe came to rescue you, and Lady Vivienne came to warn you, and every man in your life has arranged you, and I stood against the wall and let you save yourself. So I am going to ask you a foolish thing, Rosalind, because I have wondered it all evening. If you do not need me, why have me at all? You could go back to Cheldon and manage the drainage and draw your flowers and never lean your weight on any man again, and be safe and be free, and I think a part of you has wanted exactly that these 3 years. Why have me?" She was quiet a long moment against his coat. Then she said, "Because not needing a person and not wanting them are different things, and I have spent 3 years pretending they were the same, because wanting is dangerous and needing can at least be hidden. I do not need you, Sebastian. I have made very sure of that. I would not marry a man I needed, for then I could not tell whether it was love or fear. But I want you, which is a far worse thing and a far better one, and I have decided to stop pretending I do not, because I am tired of being safe and free and alone, and because you are the only person in the world who ever handed me back my own 2 feet instead of trying to carry me, and a woman could love a man a long while for that. So, I do not need you. I want you. Have the sense to know the difference is a compliment, and take me inside, for I am done shaking, and it is late, and we are to be married, and I should like to tell my sister before she hears it from the servants." Sebastian laughed, low in the dark, and took her inside, and thought that he had spent 10 years mistaking cold for strength and being needed for being loved, and that a woman in gray silk had corrected him on both counts in a single summer and would go on correcting him, he devoutly hoped, for the rest of his life. The engagement of the Duke of Everscroft to Miss Rosalind Weatherby was announced in the newspapers within the week, and the town, which had spent the summer certain it understood the arrangement, was obliged to understand it again. Sebastian watched the second understanding arrive with a grim private amusement. The same people who had laughed at a jilted spinster in June and clucked over a duke's kept florist in August, discovered in September that they had always known Miss Weatherby was a young woman of remarkable quality, that they had said so at the time, that they had never for a moment credited the vulgar gossip. Invitations that had not come for 3 years came now in a flood. Lady Harringworth, in whose ballroom the whole thing had begun, wrote Rosalind a letter of such gushing affection that Rosalind read it aloud to Lady Constance, and the two of them laughed until they cried. Sebastian did not laugh. He watched the flood of false friendship break over the woman he loved, and he thought about the summer, and about the fact that not one of these people had lifted a finger for her when she stood alone on the Harringworth floor, and he found that his old cold contempt for the world had not softened but sharpened, and that he would very much have liked to make every one of them feel, for a single hour, what Rosalind had felt walking the length of that floor alone. He said as much to her one evening in the library, and she looked up from the plate she was finishing, the 38th of the 40, and considered him. "You want them humbled," she said. "I want them to understand what they did. That is not the same as revenge, or perhaps it is. I have not your delicacy about it, Rosalind. They laughed at you. I have not forgiven it, and I do not mean to." "No," she said slowly, "I do not think you should forgive it exactly. I have not forgiven it myself. I only find I no longer carry it, which is a different thing. But I will tell you what I think, Sebastian, and you may do as you like with it, for you are the Duke and I am not yet the Duchess." She set down her brush. "I think the sweetest humbling is not a cruelty done back to them. It is to make them stand in a room and applaud a thing they once laughed at, and know, every one of them, that they laughed and that we know they laughed, and to be able to say nothing, because the thing they must applaud is too plainly good to be sneered at. That is what happened in your hall with Marlowe. No one struck him. He was only made to stand in a room while the truth was spoken and everyone heard it, and it destroyed him more completely than any blow. I should like to do that to the whole of them. Not with sharp words, with something they cannot argue with." Sebastian looked at her a long moment. "You have a plan." "I have the beginning of one. It concerns the roses." She turned the plate toward him, the 38th, Constancy's sister, a white rose that was not white. "Mr. Aldous of the Physic Garden has written to me 3 times this summer. The curators wish to publish the folio. Not privately for your wall, but as an engraved work, by subscription, under the auspices of the garden, 40 plates of the roses of Everscroft, with the botanical descriptions, a real book of science that will stand in libraries for 100 years. They want it very much. I told them I could not, because a duchess does not publish under her own name for money. It is not the thing, my father would die of shame. And then I thought. She looked up at him, and her gray eyes were bright and steady, and Sebastian saw with a lift of the heart, entirely mischievous. I thought, what if a duchess did precisely that? What if the folio came out under my own name, Rosalind, Duchess of Everscroft, not hidden, not a lady's pretty amusement, but real work, published, praised, the drainage of a great garden set down by a hand that half the county spent the summer calling a duke's kept florist? What if I made them buy it? What if I made them subscribe and hang it in their libraries and tell their grandchildren that the Duchess of Everscroft was the finest botanical artist of her generation, which Mr. Aldous is good enough to think I may be? They cannot laugh at that, Sebastian. It is too plainly good. They will have to stand in the room and applaud and know that they once laughed and be able to say nothing. That is my revenge. It is slower than yours, and I think it is sweeter. And it has the great advantage that it makes something true and beautiful instead of only making someone small. Sebastian sat quite still. Then he said, "You are the most extraordinary woman I have ever known, and I am going to spend the rest of my life underestimating you and being corrected, and I find I look forward to it more than I have looked forward to anything." "Yes," said Rosalind placidly, taking up her brush again. "You are. Now go away, I have 2 plates left and I mean to finish them before the wedding, for it will not do for the Duchess of Everscroft to be behind on her commissions." There was, however, before the wedding and the folio and the slow, sweet humbling, one matter still unhealed, and it was not society and it was not Marlowe. It was her father. Sir Edmund Weatherby had not left Cheldon in 3 years. The affliction of the nerves that the physicians named and the neighbors called ruin had settled into a kind of paralysis of the spirit. He could not face the world that had watched him fail, could not face his creditors, could not, Rosalind confessed to Sebastian one night, quite face his daughters, whose season he had funded on the last of his credit in the desperate hope of the Marlowe marriage, and who had come home instead with the marriage broken and the family the talk of the town. He had written to Rosalind at Everscroft rarely and unhappily. He had not congratulated her on her engagement to a duke. He had written instead a short and terrible letter saying that he was glad she would be provided for, and that he hoped his grace understood he could offer nothing, no settlement, no portion, nothing but a mortgaged name, and that he would not come to the wedding, as his presence could only remind the world of what the Weatherbys had become, and that she must not think hardly of him for it, though he supposed she would. Rosalind read Sebastian the letter with a steady voice and shaking hands, and when she had finished she said, "He thinks he is sparing me. He has always thought his failures were a kindness to hide from me. He hid the first mortgage and the second, and I found them out from the steward and managed them, and never told him I knew because it would have broken him to know I knew. He is proud, Sebastian, the way I am proud. It is the family disease. And now he thinks the greatest gift he can give me is to stay away from my wedding, so as not to shame me. And it is the one thing that would break my heart, and he cannot see it, because his shame is so loud he cannot hear anything else." Sebastian went to Cheldon himself. He told Rosalind he was going to inspect a horse in the neighborhood, which was a poor lie and which she saw through at once and permitted, because she understood that some things a man must do without permission or they are not the same thing. He drove the 40 miles alone and presented himself at the door of the decayed manor without warning, and Sir Edmund Weatherby, a gray-waisted man of 60 who had once been handsome, received the Duke of Everscroft in a cold parlor with the shutters half closed, and could not meet his eyes. What passed between them Sebastian never told anyone in full, not even Rosalind, but he told her the shape of it. He had not gone to offer money. He understood the man too well for that, understood that money offered would be the final humiliation, the creditor's kindness one more time. He had gone to offer a thing Sir Edmund could not refuse without cruelty, which was need. He had told the old man the truth, that his daughter was the most remarkable woman in England, that Sebastian did not deserve her and knew it, and that he, Sebastian, motherless these 17 years and fatherless these 12, had no one in the world to stand up at his wedding on his side of the church, no father to see him married, and that he was asking Sir Edmund, not for Rosalind's sake but for his own, to do him the honor of standing as near a father as Sebastian would ever have. Because a man should not be married with an empty pew where his family ought to be, and Sebastian's family was all in the ground. He had made himself the Duke of Everscroft, the one who needed. He had given the ruined proud man not charity but a use, a place, a reason to come that was not about his own shame at all but about another man's need. And Sir Edmund Weatherby, who could not have borne to come for his own sake, found he could not refuse to come for the sake of a motherless duke who had asked him plainly for a kindness only he could give. He wept, Sebastian told Rosalind that night low in the library. I have never seen a man so relieved to be needed. I think he has believed for 3 years that he was nothing but a burden and a shame, a thing his daughters would be better without, and I gave him a reason to come to your wedding that let him keep his pride, and he took it as a drowning man takes a rope. He will come, Rosalind. He will stand up on my side of the church, since I have none of my own, and he will give you away from there, which is a strange arrangement, and I do not care, and he will hold his head up, because he will believe he came to do a duke a service, which he did. It was the truest thing I said to him, and also the most useful. I am learning from you the truth at the hard moment. It works better than any lie. Rosalind did not answer for a long moment. When Sebastian looked at her, she was weeping silently, the tears she had refused to shed for Marlowe and for Lady Vivienne, and for the whole cruel season falling now at last freely, and she did not press her hand flat against her side to stop them. She let them come. She crossed the library and stood before him and put her face against his coat, and Sebastian, who had held himself apart from human touch for a decade, folded his arms around her and held her while she wept for her father and for herself, and for the long cold years of both their lives, and neither of them said anything, because there was nothing that needed saying, and the fire burned down in the grate, and outside the September dark came down over the roses. The last 2 plates were finished the week before the wedding. Rosalind lettered the 40th, the white rose that was not white, and left, as she had left on the 11th, a small space beneath it, and when Sebastian came to the drawing-room she showed it to him and said, "This one you shall name. I named the 11th, the last is yours. I have been saving it." Sebastian looked a long time at the white rose that was a dozen colors pretending to be white, and thought of the woman who drew the brown petal she would not leave out, and thought of 10 cold years and 1 warm summer, and he took up her small brush, awkward in his large hand, and under her direction, and with her steadying his fingers he lettered in the small space a single word which was Rosalind, and beneath it, smaller in the botanist's manner, the note. Named for the artist, in whom the maker at last saw the thing that was there. And Rosalind read it and did not say anything at all, and put the plate very carefully with the other 39, and it went into the folio, and stands there yet, they say, the 40th rose of Everscroft, in libraries 100 years old, where anyone may see it who cares to look for the thing that is there. They were married in October, in the small church at Everscroft, where the Thorns had been married and buried for 300 years, and Sir Edmund Weatherby stood up on the Duke's side of the aisle, in a coat that had been let out and turned but was clean and well brushed, and gave his daughter away from there with his head high, and did not once, all day, look like a ruined man. Henrietta cried through the whole ceremony and was scolded by Mrs. Pettigrew and cried harder. Lady Constance, who had given out that she never wept, wept, and Sebastian Thorn, standing at the altar of his father's as Rosalind came up the aisle on her father's arm in a gown of soft dove gray, because she would not be married in white and would not pretend to be other than she was, found that the church which had held so many cold thorn weddings held for the first time in 3 centuries a warm one, and thought that his mother, whose roses had begun the whole thing, would have been glad. He had asked her in the weeks before whether she wished to be married quietly, away from the world that had used her so ill. She had said no. She had said, with the level look he had come to love, "I was ruined in public, Sebastian. I should like to be made happy in public too, so that the same people may see the whole of it, the fall and the rising both. I do not want to hide. Hiding is what my father did, and it nearly killed him. I want to stand in the middle of the floor one more time and not be alone in it. Will you give me that?" And Sebastian had said yes, as he always said yes to her, and so they had not married quietly. Nor did they hide afterward. When the season opened, the new Duke and Duchess of Everscroft came to town, and they went deliberately to the first great ball of the year, which was given, as it happened, at Haringworth House, in the very ballroom where a jilted woman had walked the length of the floor alone in June. Sebastian had considered a good while whether to bring her back to that room, and had left the choosing to her, and she had chosen to come, and now he understood why, watching her. They were announced at the top of the stairs, the Duke and Duchess of Everscroft, and the whole ballroom turned, exactly as it had turned once before, and there was the same murmur, the same rustle of jeweled heads, and Sebastian felt Rosalind's hand tighten the smallest degree on his arm and then steady. They came down the stairs together, and the room which had laughed at her in June did the thing Rosalind had foretold in the library. It applauded. Not because it had grown a conscience. Sebastian had no illusions about that. It applauded because she was a duchess now, and beautiful, and because her folio of the roses of Everscroft had come out 3 weeks before and been praised in every journal that mattered and made her, overnight, not merely a duchess but a person of real and undeniable accomplishment, a thing too plainly good to sneer at. And because the story of how the Frost Duke had crossed a ballroom for her, and how she had refused Crispin Marlowe to his face in the Duke's own hall, had been told and retold all winter until the whole of society had persuaded itself, it had been on her side from the very first. They applauded because they could do nothing else. And Rosalind, coming down the stairs on Sebastian's arm into the applause of the room that had laughed at her, did the thing that Sebastian thought was the finest thing he ever saw her do, finer than the refusal of Marlowe, finer than the folio. She smiled at them and inclined her head graciously, warmly, without one trace of triumph or one trace of the memory, and forgave them all in a single gesture that also, and they knew it, and she knew they knew it, reminded every soul in the room of exactly what they had done and exactly how completely they had been proven wrong. It was, Sebastian thought, the sweetest humbling in the world, and she was right that it was sweeter than his cruelty would have been, because it left her the larger and them the smaller and made nothing ugly. He had wanted to make them feel what she had felt. She had done something better. She had made them applaud her and know they applauded and be unable to stop. They saw Crispin Marlowe that night across the room. His pretty story had not survived the winter. The tale of his double jilting, of the fortune chased and lost and the constant lover unmasked in a duke's hall, had made him a figure of quiet ridicule, and he had not the rank to weather ridicule as Sebastian had, and he was much diminished, and would within the year go abroad to the colonies, where a barrister might begin again where his story was not known. He looked at Rosalind across the ballroom once, and Rosalind looked back at him once, without heat and without triumph and without much of anything at all, the way one looks at weather that has passed, and then she turned her face up to Sebastian and asked him whether the next was a waltz, and it was, and he led her out. They saw Lady Vivienne Carstell too, later, and that meeting had a different flavor, because Lady Vivienne was clever and clever people are harder to humble and easier to respect. She came to them of her own accord, which took a kind of courage, and made her curtsy to the new duchess, and said, with the cool honesty that was the best thing in her, "I called on you in the garden this summer, your grace, and said a number of cruel things dressed as kindness, in the hope of frightening you off a match I wanted for myself. You answered me better than I deserved, and you have proved me wrong in every particular, and I find I would rather say so to your face than have you hear I said it behind your back, which I should do sooner or later, for I cannot keep a thing in. I congratulate you. I mean it, which surprises me more than it will surprise you." And Rosalind, who understood pride and understood the courage it took, answered her gently and truly, and the two women parted not friends exactly, but with something like respect, which Sebastian thought was the most that could honestly be made of it, and better than a false reconciliation would have been. Rosalind did not deal in false things. It was, in the end, the whole of her. They did not stay late at the Haringworth ball. When they had done what they came to do, which was to stand together in the middle of the floor that had once held her alone. They went home to Everscroft house, and Sebastian handed his Duchess down from the carriage in the light of the lamp over the door, and they went in together. And the great cold house that had held so many loveless thorns was not cold that night, nor ever much again. The folio went into a second engraving before the year was out, and a third the year after, and the roses of Everscroft, drawn by a hand that would not leave out the brown petal, went into libraries across 3 kingdoms and are there still. Rosalind drew other things after the roses, the wild flowers of the water meadows, the herbs of the physic garden, a great work on the fruit trees of the county that took her 4 years and is reckoned her masterpiece. She never signed herself anything but Rosalind, Duchess of Everscroft, plainly, without apology, a duchess who worked, and she made it in time not a scandal but a fashion, so that other women of rank took up their brushes and their studies and their real occupations and were not ashamed. And this, Sebastian thought, watching it happen over the years, was perhaps the largest thing she did, larger than the folio, larger than the humbling of a ballroom. She made it possible, by the plain fact of her own dignity, for the women who came after her to be more than ornaments, and she did it not with speeches but with work, the way she did everything. Sir Edmund Weatherby lived another 9 years, and lived them at Everscroft, in a set of rooms in the south wing that looked over the gardens, and the affliction of his nerves, which the physicians had called incurable, lifted by slow degrees once he was no longer ashamed. Once he was needed, once his grandchildren, when they came, learned to climb on his knee and demand stories of the old days at Cheldon, which he told them grandly, the ruin quite forgotten, a fine old gentleman of ancient name. He and Sebastian became, in time, real friends, 2 proud men who had each been made whole by the same woman, and when he died it was in his own bed at Everscroft with his daughters beside him, at peace. And Sebastian mourned him as the father he had told the man once in a cold parlor that he had never had. Henrietta married well and happily, a clergyman of good family with a living in the next county, exactly the worthy man Lady Vivienne had once sneered that Rosalind would end with, and Rosalind laughed about that for years. Mrs. Pettigrew lived to be 90 and won at cards to the last, and told anyone who would listen that she had known from the very first that the Frost Duke was a good man, though she had told him to his face on her own doorstep that she did not surprise, and he had better not surprise her the other way at the end, and he never did. As for Sebastian, the ice that had gone, everyone thought, all the way through, proved to have gone only most of the way, and the warm thing under it, once found, grew and did not stop. He kept the nameless rose, constancy, growing at the end of the rose walk all his life, and every year when it bloomed, crimson at noon and carmine in the evening, unable to make up its mind, he would go and stand at the end of the walk as he had stood the first evening, and more often than not Rosalind would come and find him there, and they would argue still after 20 years about whether it was crimson or carmine and never settle it, and love it the better for that as his mother had. He had gone to a ball once, meaning to say nothing to anyone, and had crossed a floor because he could not stand still, and it had undone every plan of his cold and careful life, and remade it into something warmer and larger than he had known a life could be. He thought about that sometimes in his later years, watching his wife at her drawing board with green on her fingers and the light on her face, and he thought that the coldest thing a man can do is stand still when something is wrong in front of him, and that the whole of his happiness had begun in the single moment he refused to. And he was glad, to the end of his days, more glad than he could say, that when it had mattered he had not stood still.